have that ready so that you can catch up with that and other previous live recordings over at www.learninglive.com/digital. So just before 1 o'clock, we will be joined by James Frapell, Customer Service Success Director at Go1, and Andrew Bardsley, Senior Talent Development Partner at Modulr. So session today, how to build business buy-ins and succeed in L&D. So L&D professionals have incredible potential to add business value back to their organisation. So we'll be joined by James and Andrew, and discussion points on learning value versus business value. What's the difference and why does it matter? And what common challenges in L&D professionals face when speaking with business leaders, and how can they overcome them? Also, they'll be giving you some practical tips to help you shift the conversation away from talking about learning value and towards talking about business value. So we'll be starting in a couple of minutes, just welcoming more of our colleagues into the webinar. So if you have just joined us, a very warm welcome to you. We will be utilising the chat function quite a lot today. So if you just pop your name, where you're calling from, if you haven't done so already, always great to see where you're calling from. My name is Scott Shepherd, Learning Development Manager here at the LPI. So I will be your host today and helping James and Andrew with any questions that you will pose during today's live event. And if I can just ask you just to remain on mute, just a bit of housekeeping here, so that James and Andrew can give us their full attention, that would be amazing. Joelle from Stockport in Greater Manchester, hi, nice to have you with us. And also Marie from a sunny Lincolnshire. So I think, Marie, you've got most of the sunshine here in the UK. I'm based here on the south coast. It's a bit dull and gloomy. So, but at least we're heading in the right direction. March will be upon us very soon. And yeah, that's spring and summer as we bounce into that. Hi, Helen, calling from Belfast in Northern Ireland. Nice to have you with us. So just a couple of minutes now before I hand the reins over to James and Andrew, just making it 1 o'clock now. So it's my great pleasure to hand you over to James and Andrew, and enjoy the session today. Over to you, James.
Thank you so much, Scott, and good afternoon, everybody, and welcome today to today's webinar. It's fantastic to see so many of you join us today and give up your lunchtime. So thank you very much. First and the hardest part of the webinar, I'm just going to get the tech to work. So I'm just going to share my screen with you now. And Andrew, if you could just give me a thumbs up to let me know that you can see my screen. Perfect.
Yeah, looks perfect.
Perfect. Hardest part, check done. Fantastic. So as I said, welcome everybody. For those of you that don't know me, my name is James. I'm the Customer Success Director at Go1, and I'm delighted to be joined today by Andrew Bardsley. So Andrew works at a company called Modulr Finance. They are a Go1 customer, and he's going to be sharing some of his insights and experiences on today's topic. So what are we going to be talking about today? Well, in today's session, we are going to be focusing on all things business, specifically how you as L&D professionals can build business buy-in and succeed in L&D. So we're going to be doing a few things in today's session. We're going to be presenting some research from Go1, which I'm going to talk about in a second. And Andrew is also going to be talking about his experiences in this topic area. Later on in the session, we would also love to hear about your experiences. So if you have any fantastic examples along the themes that we'll be discussing, please do pop them in the chat. And if you are brave enough, we'd love for you to come off mute and provide these examples to the wider group. I can see we've got 70 people on today's call. There is a huge collection of knowledge and insight on today's call. So yeah, if you have anything that you would like to add, we'd absolutely love to hear you and bring you into the discussion. So without further ado, this is what we will be talking about today. So we're going to be focusing on three things over the course of the webinar. So the first thing is we're going to be looking at learning value versus business value. So this is thinking about when you, as an L&D professional, are talking to leaders in your business, how are you describing the impact that you have? Are you talking in terms of learning value or business value? we're going to be exploring what the difference is and why it matters. Next up, we're then going to be looking at some of the challenges that L&D professionals face when it comes to talking with business leaders. And this is where we're going to pull Andrew into the conversation and get his sort of insights, experiences, and examples. And then finally, we're going to be telling you about some great free resources that we developed at Go1, and diving into some practical tips to help you as L&D professionals start shifting that conversation away from describing the value and impact of your team, making it less about talking in terms of delivering learning value and more in terms of delivering business value. And we really want that session to be as practical as possible. So we're going to be talking through practical examples, top tips, and in that part, we'd love to hear from you, the audience, too. Perfect. So just as a little bit of context, and before we begin, I just want to take a second to tell you about the research that underpins what we're going to be talking about in today's session. So at Go1, we're sort of very passionate about research, and we work with sort of thought leaders across the space, which are these three lovely ladies you can see on the screen. So we've got Michelle Ockers, Shannon Tipton, and Laura Overton, who are part of an emerging stronger team. And we've partnered with them to help drive sort of insights and practical tips that we can share with our community. And in May 2021, we ran a series of roundtable conversations with learning leaders from around the globe. During these events, Michelle, Sharon, and Laura engaged Go1 customers to discuss and explore the topic of increasing L&D business value. So what we're going to be talking about today are the insights that came out of these conversations. The other thing that was sort of produced on the back of this work was an ebook that was produced by this team here, and we're going to be sharing that with you. It's a really fantastic resource. It's completely free to download, and it contains lots of practical advice. So that's what we'll be running through in the second part of the webinar. So just before just to sort of kick off, this is a really interesting question that we posed in those roundtable discussions to the L&D leaders that we were discussing, or that we were talking to. And I really want to get a sense check from people on the webinar now. So Scott is going to launch a poll in just a second. But what I want you to think about is, when you talk about the value that L&D brings to your organization, what narrative of success do you use? Do you talk in terms of activity, engagement, efficiency, usefulness, business performance, or culture change? So Scott, if you're able to launch the poll, it'd be great to see what the wider group come back with here. Cool, so you can see some responses coming in, a lot around business performance indicators, great. Some around activity, engagement, efficiency. Yeah, usefulness. Fantastic. Perfect. We'll just give you a couple more seconds to finish that off. Do I need to end poll now, Scott, or here we go.
There we go. Just sharing the results with you.
Perfect. Okay, amazing. So yeah, so from that result, we can see the overwhelming majority, so 40%, describing value in terms, or some narrative of success in terms of business performance. And then sort of 60% made up of others. So we've got usefulness, efficiency, engagement, activity. Thank you, Scott. So this is sort of really, really interesting. And this mirrors what we sort of saw to an extent in our conversations with our, as part of that research piece that we did. So fantastic to see sort of 40% that sort of describe impact in terms of business performance. This is absolutely the sort of the way that you should be describing the impact of your L&D team. And interesting to see a fragmented number looking at things like activity, efficiency, engagement, and usefulness, which is sort of mirrored to what we saw in our poll there. So in our global conversations, when we asked this question, it showed that most L&D professionals are comfortable talking about their value in terms of learning value, particularly improving the efficiency of learning activities and the level of engagement with their solutions. So how successful has this been? Well, it's been great. Everyone's completed the training. Yeah, we've provided some surveys. The satisfaction across this training has been really high. People have enjoyed doing the training. But what we actually then found was that not as many L&D professionals are as comfortable exploring how they add value back to the business. And that typically L&D is more comfortable describing their value in terms of learning outputs, i.e. the number of people that have completed the training, satisfaction surveys, than business outputs. And really focusing on adding business value is the first secret to success in L&D when it comes to building better business buy-in. And this is a shift that L&D leaders in our global conversation were really, really keen to make. So when it comes to thinking about the conversations that you're having with your leaders across your business, it's really important to think about, are you talking in terms of learning value, or are you talking in terms of business value? And if you're able to speak more to business value, so the impact that you're having in terms of business performance, this will unlock a whole heap of buy-in from the senior leaders across your business. And then this will lead to things like allocation of bigger budget for training resources, but it will also lead to things like better buy-in across the C-suite, right? And things like project sponsors, as well as sort of managers and others inside of the business, sort of prioritizing and making time for the training initiatives that you'll be delivering. So it's really, really important to think about in these conversations that you're having with business leaders, how are you describing the impact that your initiatives are having? Are you talking in terms of courses completed and sort of satisfaction surveys, or are you talking the language of the business leaders? Cool. So it all sounds very simple in theory, and if only life was that simple, we could finish the webinar here and we could all go on and have enjoy the rest of our afternoon. But as L&D professionals, we all know this is far, far easier said than done. So the other thing that we looked at was, well, what's the sort of friction between L&D leaders and business leaders when having these conversations? And what we found was in our conversations that L&D leaders are comfortable having this conversation with leaders inside of their business, so that they're comfortable talking in terms of business value. But 4 out of 5 believed that their business leaders were not willing to prioritize a conversation with them. Sound familiar? Well, what's the view of the business leaders? So if we looked at a piece of research from Mind Tools for Business that released a report in 2021, and actually what they found was that the average business leader perceives a significant contribution from L&D teams to only one of their top 5 goals. So there's clearly, this sort of suggests a need for L&D to do something different. And maybe it's the way that we're having this conversation with our business leaders. So if we're finding it hard, or if we're finding that business leaders aren't willing to prioritize a conversation with us, but business leaders only think that we contribute significantly to one of their 5 projects, we need to think about how we're having that conversation and how we can frame it differently to unlock more buy-in. Perfect. So that's sort of what we're going to discuss now as the second part of this webinar. And I'm really, really delighted to bring Andrew Bardsley into the conversation. As I said, Andrew's worked with us closely during his time at Modulr, and has some really fantastic insights on how we can sort of have better conversations with our business leaders. So Andrew, thank you so much for joining.
No problem.
And just for context, I gave a fairly hasty introduction to yourself, but it'd be great just if you could introduce yourself to the audience and just, I guess, speak a little bit about your role at Modulr.
Yeah, absolutely. So thanks so much for having me. It's really, really great to be here, and fantastic topic to be chatting about today. So, yeah, as James said, I'm Andrew. I'm part of the talent development team at Modulr. So really, it really is about looking at that whole sort of life cycle of an employee's learning journey throughout our business. So from graduates, taking them through graduate schemes and bringing on apprenticeships, all the way through our sort of soft skills and sort of business skills training, leadership, management development. We really do touch everything at Modulr, which is fantastic. It's such a varied role, and I think one of the best things that I love about our Modulites, as we call them, is that they have a real sort of desire to learn. So that's kind of half my job is done for me, really, because they want to learn, they want that knowledge, and it's about me providing the frameworks, the tools, the resources for them to meet that need. So yeah, really excited to talk to you a little bit about what we're doing at Modulr, and hopefully can share some things that might work for you all out there as well. So yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Andrew. So I guess straight off the bat, I'd be really interested, how much do these stats resonate with you? I guess the one being the sort of 4 out of 5 L&D professionals believe that business leaders weren't willing to prioritize a conversation with them. Is that something that you've seen across the work that you've done?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. So I actually don't resonate with this one as much as I do with the other the other side of that slide. So I think business leaders are tending to come and have conversations with me, but what they aren't doing is maybe framing that conversation or thinking in a sort of a wider sense of what L&D can provide to them. So yeah, it certainly sort of comes across to me that the priority isn't number one for them. They maybe think it's a quick fix, it's an easy solution, but actually then what I can provide in terms of that sort of the conversations we can have actually unlocks the sort of the wider potential for L&D. So yeah, definitely bits of things that I resonate with there, but maybe just a slight sort of tweak in the order.
Nice.
Yeah.
Okay, interesting. So thinking about this piece of sort of business leaders only perceiving the L&D add value to one of their sort of 5 projects, like what are some of any ideas on what might be sort of driving that, or how to sort of overcome that sort of challenge? Like, yeah.
Yeah, no, totally. And I think it's such an important thing you were touching on before about really demonstrating the business value, because when leaders come to us and speak to us, I think if we don't or can't communicate that value, they might never come back and ask again. So we need to really think about how we can go beyond the courses and the resources and the sort of the happy sheets and things like that, and then maybe start talking about how we can solve problems that are actually happening in the business. And I think an example that was sort of going through my mind as you were talking, James, was around a recent conversation I was having with one of our execs, and she's leading our European expansion and all the sort of European operations that sit behind that. And she came to me with a request, which was, I need my team to be trained in negotiation skills. And fine, a relatively fine request. I could very easily have taken that at that sort of face value, and certainly have been guilty of that in the past. And I'm sure that'll resonate with people out there on the call as well. But I could have easily shared a course with them or a TED talk or direct them to our learning system. But I think that wouldn't have had an impact to the business, or really to the sort of the ability to those employees to be able to sort of effectively do their job. So what I was really conscious to do was to sort of have a conversation, initially with this exec and her sort of senior leadership team, really trying to understand the challenges that the team were facing, and then sort of that conversation further with the rest of the team. We ran a really great sort of open forum for the team to share their struggles, and also actually just to help me understand the landscape of sort of what that team were facing and what they were sort of coming up against. And I think what was really amazing was how much sort of I learned about that team. That a huge part of their role is outsourcing to other parts of the business, and sort of to those external bodies. And so yeah, I could really understand where that negotiation skills piece came from. But I think it was important to actually look a bit further than that. And these employees were communicating across teams, across different countries, across cultures, with people who maybe having competing priorities. So communicating with them in a way that appeals to that sort of style and their motivations was, in my view, sort of so vital. And I think it was also clear for me, listening to them, that there was a lack of understanding within the wider business, sort of as just generally, as to what that European team does, and what they were trying to accomplish, and that sort of education piece for the wider business, I think was so important to make sure, I guess, everyone was on the same page, and sort of they understood when those requests of them came in, that there'd be a bit of context behind that. And then I guess the last point around that was, really surprisingly, I think the managers who were sitting in on this open forum were mostly hearing this for the first time. So there was clearly a bit of a breakdown in communication within the team itself. So how could we go about making sure that those conversations, so similar to that sort of open forum we were having, would continue to happen? So yeah, on the face of it, a request for negotiation skills, but actually digging deeper, we've moved to sort of a suite of psychometric testing for building those relationships and better communications, that sort of education piece for the wider business, and then like a tailored manager session to help have those conversations in a more sort of impactful way. So yeah, we can really start to put that impactful intervention in place, I suppose. So yeah, I think it's all about that sort of digging a little bit deeper beyond the surface to really understand what the business wants, I suppose.
Amazing. I think that's super interesting, and it comes up a lot in the discussions that I have around the conversations we have with business leaders, and sometimes it can feel that it's like an order taking almost, right? Which is like, I need this, deliver me. Like I need X, deliver me Y, right? So just to sort of push back and really unpick, I think, is absolutely key. When you did go back, what was the response from the leader? How was it received?
Yeah, I think it was. I think it sort of took her a little bit by surprise that that sort of the team, the L&D team that she maybe thought weren't capable of that type of thing, could sort of give such a sort of a big business value, I think. And I think the biggest win for me is it exactly, sort of put L&D at the table. And I think this particular exec starts shouting about the value that this conversation had, that the intervention had for her team, and it certainly kept her coming back, and we've kept that conversation going. But I think even better is that the word is now spread. So head of engineering now has picked up a conversation with me about the QA team. And we're doing a very similar sort of approach, where we're going to go and speak with the team, really understand the landscape of what they're facing, and try to put a similar intervention in place. So yeah, that profile of L&D has certainly grown, and just by that demonstration of real business value, I think, just great to be part of that, I think.
Amazing. And so you've talked about the sort of profile of the L&D team have grown. What did that sort of look like in real terms, in terms of, did it unlock? So you talked about unlocking further opportunities across the business, or getting pulled into more conversations. Were there any other additional gains that sort of came out, I guess, project sponsorship, or anything in these terms?
Yeah, I think one great thing was working with the wider HR team. So we have a team of people partners, and I think having demonstrated the value that particular conversation had in this example, I think it was almost it was too good an opportunity not to then tap into that people partner resource, who are going out to the wider business, having these conversations almost on a daily basis, and really trying to get them on side, talking the same language as the L&D team were, and just sort of spreading that word, around learning, around the value that we can bring. So I think when you see it work, and when you see it in practice, you can sort of bring everyone along with it. And yeah, in terms of sponsorship, I think not necessarily a specific project, but certainly just having a seat at that sort of exec table now, and being able to point to something within the business that we've done and really achieved and moved the business forward, I think it's a great selling point for the team.
Amazing. That's such a great example. Thank you, Andrew, for sharing.
No worries.
So really, I can't see the chat, so Scott, I'm going to rely on you here. But we've kind of really just talked about one way of unlocking the conversation with business leaders. So when requests come in, not taking them at face value, really sort of delving into their problems so that we can demonstrate actively the value that the L&D teams can provide in driving their sort of business needs forward. Are there any sort of questions in chat, Scott, or are there any other examples from the group here that people might want to share around unlocking these conversations with business leaders?
Yeah, there's some great comments come through, James. Craig's, but I think that there is a lack of awareness of what impact and value L&D can drive in organisations, and in some instances, what L&D are actually capable of. Organisations need to drive that transformation rather than the transactional focus, which is a really good comment. Also, Namita's put, I think often the issue is that people look at L&D as a supplier of training instead of a group or expert that can really help scan the landscape and figure out what the real issues or what those competency gaps are, and then be able to recommend what types of changes or solutions are needed. And a lot of them could be other than just training, which is a really good example as well. It's not generally just training, it could be something else that, coaching, mentoring, that type of thing, what actually needs to be implemented there as well. Claire's, but also I think L&D professionals tend to have a good knowledge and relationships across the business, having an understanding of what is going on that others in projects might not be aware of. Again, that communication piece, and often brought in right at the end of projects where the decision or the outcome has already been decided, rather than being involved at the beginning to drive that change forward.
Yeah, I think that talks really nicely, doesn't it, to also Andrew's point of, just getting in the conversation, then all the people in that conversation are then aware of what they can get from the L&D team and what value they can bring to their initiatives, right? Which is
There's a great question from Joelle. She asked, what if you're working with a learning team who don't think it's worth convincing the stakeholders? How do you get L&D buy-in to get business buy-in?
That's a really great question. That was genuinely something I was going to ask Andrew, right? Which is
brilliant.
When I was going to say, like, what's the impact that had on your team, Andrew, when when they could see others suddenly realizing, hang on, this L&D team provides amazing value. Like, I wonder if that's I'd be interested to know, like, that impact that had. And I guess to Joelle's question, how can you kind of engage these L&D stakeholders that might not be engaged and might be sort of engaging in that order taking sort of process?
Yeah, and I think there's a comment in the chat there around the business not seeing us as experts, and I think having an example like this or going through something like this really does show yourself that you can do it and you are the expert. And I think there's such a great feeling, such a great morale boost and motivation to keep going, knowing that you are going on the right track, you are sort of paving the way forward and bringing people along with you. I think it's great. So keep persevering with that. And I guess if there are people on your team who aren't engaged, who aren't seeing the value, I think a really difficult one. And I've I guess fortunately not necessarily been in the position to do that, but maybe running a similar sort of session within the team, and sort of trying to unpick what's driving that thought, what's driving those behaviors, understanding the challenges that they're facing, trying to unpick a little bit around that. So it could be worthwhile running one of these open forums to really understand what the reality is for your L&D partners as well, so that they can unlock a bit of sort of space and time for them to do what they really want to do. So like I say, not something that I've experienced firsthand, but I think that would maybe be the first thing that I would go to. Just cards on the table type thing. What your thoughts? What we're doing wrong? What we're doing right?
For me, I think it's just about demonstrating the positive impact that this approach has, right? So if you could demonstrate that, we had this conversation that enabled us to gain this sponsorship from C-suite, which has enabled us to win this project, which has enabled us to secure more budget, right? If you can really demonstrate the the value of this approach, and show them tangibly why this approach is best practice, and then maybe link that into development, right? There might be a lot of reasons why people shy away from these conversations, because it can be challenging, nerve-wracking going into a room with business leaders and speaking their language, right? So there might be some development that you could tailor into any development plans you're having with them. How do you have a conversation with business leaders, for example? How do you own the room with senior stakeholders? It's not an easy thing to do, so that might be something to look at too.
Yeah, for sure. I think we're going to come on to talk about data in a second, so I don't want to sort of jump the gun at all. But I think data is absolutely your friend as well, and being able to say, we took this from here, from this figure to this figure, and that was purely off our intervention. I think again a great way to communicate with the team, but then also with those senior leaders and managers that you're talking to as well.
Perfect. Well, that's a fantastic segue. Thank you, Andrew. So we're just going to move on to sort of the third part of what we're going to discuss today. And just before we do, I just want to share with everyone on the call today a resource that I referenced at the top of the call. But this is the output of the research that we did with our Emerging Stronger team and the conversations that we had. And it's an ebook that is completely free to download. And within it, it contains 50 tips for increasing L&D business value. So a lot of the things that we're talking about today, a lot of the themes that we're talking about today, are covered in this ebook, and actually what it does is it provides 50 tips to start to have the conversation. So it's really practical, really it's really helpful, and it's completely free to download. So Scott, I believe if you could just post the link to this ebook in the chat, if you are interested in getting your hands on this, just click the link and you can download it for free from there. So yeah, some great tips. It also comes with a host of other resources which sort of help you start having this conversation. So yeah, just wanted to sort of share that and sort of segue into the final part of our discussion this afternoon. So as part of the ebook, it does what it says on the tin. It has no less than 50 top tips. And the tips have been categorized down into these 9 key areas. So lots of different sort of places where you can start and sort of dive in. And what we wanted to do is just focus on a couple of areas and dive into some specific examples from sort of Andrew's experiences, and also experiences from you, the audience. So we're going to run through sort of two or three, but if anyone has any tips that really resonate on these topics, post them in the chat, and if you would like to come on and share them with the wider group, that'd be absolutely fantastic. So there's sort of a couple that are kind of close to my heart and a couple that are close to Andrew's heart. Andrew, you're the guest. Let's start with the thing that sort of resonates most with you. And I know when we've spoken earlier on this, the one that really stood out was tips to help pursue business goals rather than silver bullets. I'm really interested in like what this means to you and what are some of those top tips.
Yeah, absolutely. I think just really nicely links into what we were talking about just before. And I think if we're not doing things within the business that are really going to help with the reality of what is happening in the business, then it's almost not worth it. But then at the same time, there probably isn't a silver bullet for a lot of these things. And I think an example that I guess I could talk through in terms of what's going on at Modulr is how we approached management development. So it was really clear to us that our middle managers had a really sort of mixed experience, mixed ability. Some were recently promoted, just a few in the sort of really new into that management scene, but then also some who have been in the business for years and in business for years. So we wanted to make sure that they had the skills to manage at Modulr and manage sort of the Modulr way, sort of managing their teams effectively. And I think the first thing that would come across anyone's mind, maybe even people on the call today, let's run a leadership program. And I think, yeah, a great intervention and something that would be impactful. We could talk about leadership styles, we could talk about skill will matrix, we should talk about business simulations and run all those great things. It would be a great thing to do. But I think in terms of the reality, the reality for Modulr at that time was that employees weren't having one-to-ones. They weren't getting feedback from their managers. They didn't know how to set goals. Key things to ensure that we had engaged employees, successful managers, successful business. So I guess instead of thinking about a fully fledged leadership program in terms of our silver bullet, we decided to tackle these areas as a sort of pardon the pun, in a sort of a modular way. So that's taking each one, doing a little separate thing for it. So we knew that this would have a big impact. We knew that there'd be really tangible business outcomes. So we set up a manager forum. We met once a month, and we would discuss different topics. At this forum, we'd get mixed sort of ability within those groups, but we'd really lean on that experience and the lack of experience within that room to discuss what's worked, what's not working, where they maybe need help. We could then really tailor the advice and the sort of the frameworks, the tips, the tricks that we gave them, and make sure that they were really useful and beneficial for the people in that sort of scenario. So yeah, again, really just focusing on what the business needs rather than thinking about what that sort of silver bullet catch-all might be. So yeah, not sure if that's helpful. Maybe people have done something similar in the past, but that seemed to work for us, really focusing on that business goal and not a sort of not silver bullet.
There's definitely something that resonates with the work we do with our customers, right? Which is like, yeah, what are the core things that will sort of drive success, and also not trying to do everything in one go, right? So like, what are the one or two things that will move the needle that we can deliver really, really well? Which is actually kind of what you said, right? So not looking for this whole silver bullet that's going to do it best. It's like, what are the one or two really practical things we can do? Cool.
Yeah, that's it, exactly.
And then, so just the other tips, Andrew, I'd be really interested to hear sort of an example from you. And this is something that I talk about quite a lot, and sort of Laura Overton, who produced this research, is like obsessed with this, which is sort of tips to help you redefine value. So like kind of what we're speaking about at the beginning of the webinar, moving away from learning value. So looking at like in Go1 terminology, course completion data, and sort of minutes of learning, and then actually moving towards like business value metrics. I think is something that it is like really challenging to do, but it's so crucial if you're going to get buy-in from your leaders. So I'd love to understand like any examples you have from your time at Modulr of like when you've sort of redefined the value conversation you've had.
Yeah, no, I think those things you just mentioned, James, are always going to be part of our arsenal. The sort of the happy sheets, the attendance records, the sort of the learning management system data, and all that sort of stuff. It's always going to be there, and it's always going to be important, but it shouldn't be the only thing we focus on, I guess, is what we're trying to say here. So I think I was talking about our management interventions just before, and I think one of the ways we discovered we needed to start having conversations about one-to-ones, for example, was by looking at data, and sort of more specifically some data from our employee engagement survey. So we noticed that one of the questions, which was something around I get quality time with my manager, and the score for this question was around the sort of the 50% mark. So we dived into that data a little bit more. We tried to understand where that was coming from, and we knew it was sort of something that we needed to try and look into. We felt there's something needed to be done, and probably felt that our managers could use a little bit more support. So I guess, of course, it wasn't the only factor. Our managers weren't the only factor, building into this, but we thought that we could make an impact by focusing on that group, and by running the sessions we sort of mentioned above, creating those connections within our manager forum, really giving them practical frameworks to use within those conversations. We saw that score rise from 50%, around that 50% mark, to over 85%. So yes, again, that intervention won't be the only contributing factor, but looking at the data, we can really have a good idea sort of as to well, initially where to start, but then also how we've done on that sort of scale. So I guess I often feel, and maybe people out there feel the same as well, that as L&D professionals, we're always looking for the next next big thing or the next trend, when actually sometimes keeping it simple and just focusing on the data and sort of targeting and being really targeted with that data is sometimes the way to go. Really focusing on those business needs, I think, as we've said throughout today. So yeah, a really good win for us. And yeah, always focusing on that data.
And I think aligning on the data points that your business leaders care about, right? So if they care about increasing that service score, then that's amazing. Like just to tie that back to sort of what to one of the themes around sort of unlocking buy-in, like what did that do, like in those conversations, to be able to speak that same language? Like how did that sort of transform the conversations that you were having?
Yeah, I think one of the main things is it helped us to build a story around what we're doing. So, you know, instead of me presenting a training course that I wanted to run, actually it was presenting the sort of the impact that it had, and then showing the business value, and then saying, by the way, this is how we did it. It's almost that sort of start with why, that sort of type of approach. So it really does, when you've got that data to back up what you're saying, builds that story for your leaders and managers, and really helps you to have that conversation, I've found. So yeah, really a really good win for us there.
Awesome. So I'm just going to pause there from those two. Scott, are there any questions from the chat, or are there any examples that anyone would sort of like to share with the wider group now on any of these sort of top areas that resonate with you?
I've just said that there's some comments that have been made, I think, regarding when Andrew spoke about the silver bullets. Tony's put, I've done this before, and having the managers to own the direction of the learning and to reflect post-learning too, in terms of putting learning into practice. That leads to an actual change is really powerful, particularly around management content, which is often seen as either compliance or mandatory as well. So some good comments coming through here. Namita's put, for one of the programs that she's designed, the customer was interested in the reduction of the number of iterations it took their project teams to get the budget right. So reworking time loss from multiple people. This is, to me, was closer to making a real impact for creating business value instead of just completion status, test scores, etc.
Yeah, amazing, great example.
But there's also been some other comments coming through. It's actually about, you know, that storytelling and what Andrew said before. You know, if you are, and I think here at the LPI is that we've seen a lot of data where we're actually telling that story, you know, as in terms of what you're trying to, I suppose your end goal, your end purpose is to create that storytelling aspect of that. We all love a great story, right? So if you're telling it in the right context, it really has that impact as well.
100%.
Completely agree. Perfect. So I think we've probably got time just to touch on one final point. So Andrew, I know we've talked a little bit around tips to help you share ownership, and often something that I see a lot is L&D teams that are swamped with requests and also people sort of expecting them to have all of the answers. It is something that we come up against in our customer conversations. So Andrew, have you got any tips here, particularly around sort of getting shared ownership on projects, or I guess any examples from when you've done it at Modulr?
Yeah, for sure. I think I'm always guilty of just trying to do it all myself, and maybe again others feel the same. You know, knowing the content, writing the slides, presenting. You know, and just I think often it just isn't realistic and really not practical. I think an example that probably comes to mind is around the induction program that we built at Modulr. We call it Modulr Fundamentals, and all of our new joiners go through a series of 101 sessions to help them sort of understand the business, the industry, our products, all that sort of thing. And you know, it just wouldn't be practical for me, I don't think, to research all that content, to write it, to present it, and I think would probably come with a bit of sort of a lack of credibility. I'd miss details, I'd probably make plenty of mistakes. So to get this program up and running, I worked with the subject matter experts across the business to help create that content, and gave them that sort of accountability of owning it and running the sessions themselves. Obviously I was there to advise on the best practice from a sort of a session presentation standpoint. And I think that's where we can, in this scenario, add our value by giving that sort of best practice when it comes to keeping an audience engaged, for example. But the content, the presentation, actually the sort of the presenting of doing it was all on those subject matter experts. And I think with that came that accountability of making sure that it was up to date, it was accurate, it was well presented, and all that sort of stuff. So, and I guess this doesn't just have to be for inductions. I guess it's about how do we provide our knowledge of creating a course, for example, and sort of use the people out there in the business to help understand and develop that content, and really keep them accountable for keeping it great. So yeah, I think sharing that ownership when we're creating a course, I think could be and should be really sort of top of our agenda.
And I'm just interested, so if we think about one of the challenges we picked out earlier around sort of difficult for L&D to get that sort of conversation, or to get leaders to prioritize that. I guess how can you, like, to get sort of shared ownership, you need to get sort of buy-in from these leaders. Any sort of tips around that?
Yeah, I think, well, for this specific example, around induction, again, it all came from feedback from our sort of onboarding survey. So people were having a really great time sort of through the recruitment process. They'd be excited for their first day, first week, but then what they were lacking was the knowledge to really hit the ground running. And we were seeing that when it came to probation and goal setting and that sort of side of things. So again, it came from that data, the feedback we were getting from the business, and again helped us to frame that conversation about why we were doing it, and what needed to change, and our sort of suggestion about how we might make that change. So yeah, again, it's about understanding that data, understanding the business value that's going to have, and then being able to manufacture a story that sort of encompasses all of that. So yeah, I think really focusing on that data, focusing on the feedback you have, really understanding what the value is going to be, and then you can craft a story to fit and get that buy-in.
Fantastic. Awesome. Thank you so much, Andrew.
Yeah, no worries.
Scott, are there any last questions before we?
There is, if you're able to take a question. Joe's got a really good question, and she asks, what if you are the L&D team and the business doesn't really know what it wants, but it wants everything? Good question.
And it wants everything.
Yeah.
I think a difficult one, and I think I've used the sort of the term team I guess interchangeably, but for most of my time at Modulr, it was just me. So I think being really realistic about what you can achieve and what's possible. But then I think there's a tip here around prioritizing. And I think if you can understand what is going to add the most value, understanding your capacity, what's going to move the needle and really sort of impact the business the most, I think that's where you can sort of start to craft that conversation, using the data to really back up what you're trying to say, and just being really honest with the team to say, look, I can't do it all. I won't be able to do it all. If I do it all, it's probably not going to be particularly good. So yeah, using the data and understanding what's potentially going to have the most value, I think would be my suggestion.
And I think I completely echo that, right? It's sort of part 6, part 7, I think. But prioritization, if you've got your business leaders and they're giving you a long list of things to do, you can, if you can have that conversation in terms of this is the business value it will deliver, and this is what we can deliver with current resource, that might unlock further conversations around allocation of headcount, budget, etc. Right? So if you are speaking the language of like this is what you want to do, this is what we can achieve with what we currently have. So if you need to achieve more, let's have a conversation around what the resources required to do that. But I guess the key is, if you're framing each of those projects in terms of this is the business value that we will deliver, that's when that's when you'll really get your seat at the table with the leadership team inside of your organization.
100%.
Perfect. So look, we're at sort of 45 minutes. There's just one final question just for the team. So I just want to, but before we sort of go into thanks to sort of Andrew and the group, I hope everyone found that presentation useful. I hope there were some insights there. We've already sort of shared the link to the ebook, which is a completely free resource. So if you would like to download the ebook, just please go ahead and download that. But we also just want to understand if anyone on the call is interested in speaking with a consultant from Go1, just around your e-learning requirements, please let us know, and we can get in contact. So yeah, just answers in the poll. But that is everything from today's session. So I just want to say thank you so much, Andrew, for joining us today. Really, really appreciate it, and some fantastic insights, no less. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. I would love to connect with all of you on LinkedIn and sort of discuss this. So if you would like to connect with me, I'm just James Frapell on LinkedIn. So yeah, if you have any follow-up questions or you'd ever like to discuss this topic in more detail, I'd be more than happy to help. So yeah, connect with me on LinkedIn, James Frapell, or you can email me. I'm james.frapell@go1.com. I'm happy to discuss. But yeah, thank you so much, Andrew, and thank you so much, Scott, for putting this on, and thank you everyone for attending.
Yeah, thanks for joining, everyone. It's been really great. Thanks for having me.
Brilliant, thank you. Can I just say a big thank you to James and Andrew sharing your knowledge, skill and expertise there, and I'm sure from the chat there's been lots of engagement, lots of questions, so just a big thank you today for sharing your insight and knowledge. So thank you to everyone that has joined us today. A big thank you to you. Today's session again can be found at www.learninglive.com/digital, where you will find this and other previous recordings available to view as well. So a big thank you from myself here at the LPI for joining today. So I'd just like to say a big thank you to all of you for attending today's session. So again, up and coming webinars. On the 1st of March next week, Unlocking the Hidden Value of Data Literacy in the Workplace, hosted by Cubicle. And then on the following same week, on the 3rd of March, we do have How to Build a Sustainable Learning Ecosystem by Odillo. So we'll be joined by Nick Shackleton-Jones and also Steve Webster. So apart from that, I'd just like to wish you all a fantastic afternoon. Thank you for joining us today, and I wish you a very pleasant day. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. See you.
Thanks, everyone.